Little girl's brave words. In court changed her family forever. Jaw-dropping. The courtroom was packed, tense, silent until a child's voice sliced through the air like a blade. I said. Amara's voice trembled but didn't break. She stood on the witness stand, small hands gripping a weathered sketchbook to her chest like a shield. Her shoes barely touched the edge of the wooden platform. She took a shaky breath, looked the judge straight in the eye, and declared, louder this time, "My dad didn't do it, but I know who did." The entire room erupted. Gasps broke like waves crashing on a cliff. Papers shuffled. Jaws dropped. Someone in the back muttered, "What did she just say?" The prosecutor shot up like a spring-loaded trap, slamming his hands on the table. "Objection, Your Honor. This is outrageous. This child is not a credible witness." The judge's gavel cracked against the bench like thunder. "Order! Order in this court!" But the room refused to calm. Amara stood frozen in place, her wide brown eyes reflecting the chaos she'd just ignited. Her mother sat in the gallery, hands trembling, mouth slightly open in stunned disbelief. Her father, seated at the defendant's table with cuffs on his wrists and chains at his ankles, slowly lifted his head. For the first time in months, a flicker of hope lit up his hollowed face. Amara could feel it, the power of truth, the fear of it, the weight. And still, no one looked at her like she mattered except to silence her. The judge turned to her, trying to soften his tone. "Young lady, do you understand the seriousness of what you're saying?" Amara nodded, clutching the sketchbook tighter. Her knuckles turned white. "Yes, Your Honor, I do. But nobody wanted to listen before. So now, I'm making you listen." The courtroom fell into a suffocating silence. Her voice, though soft, seemed to echo louder than any shout. It wasn't just her words that hit the room, it was her resolve. A 9-year-old girl, daring to break a silence enforced by adults in suits and uniforms. "Young lady," the prosecutor began again, voice venomous, "you are inserting yourself into an adult criminal trial. Your statement could mislead the jury. You're wasting this court's—" "I'm not wasting anyone's time," Amara cut in, eyes blazing. "You already did that when you arrested the wrong man." The judge banged the gavel again. "Enough," he barked. "Mr. Collins, sit down. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt." Collins reluctantly sank into his chair, fuming. The judge turned to Amara, gaze cautious but curious. "What exactly are you trying to tell us?" Amara hesitated. The entire courtroom was waiting. Every breath held hostage. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she opened the sketchbook and flipped it to a drawing, a detailed scene of a man standing near a broken security camera outside the victim's home. It was dated 3 days before the attack. "I saw him there. I drew this the day it happened. Nobody asked me, so I kept it to myself. But I remember every detail, because that man isn't my dad." A collective murmur swept through the court. Her mother began crying silently. Her father whispered her name like a prayer. And still Amara stood tall. She wasn't just speaking for her father. She was standing up to a machine that had already decided what truth looked like without her. And now the courtroom was forced to reckon with something it had ignored. A child's truth, sharp and undeniable. A bailiff leaned into the judge's ear. The judge nodded slowly, then looked back at Amara. "We will recess. This testimony requires immediate review." He struck the gavel one final time. "Court is adjourned." And just like that, the courtroom shattered into movement lawyers whispering, spectators buzzing, officers rushing out. Before she ever stood in that courtroom, her family had already endured unimaginable pain and injustice. Their home wasn't perfect, but it was warm. The walls were lined with framed drawings, most of them Amara's a son with a smiling face, her parents holding hands, a house with a crooked chimney. They didn't have much, but what they had was real. Love, safety, laughter. Her father, Marcus Daniels, worked long hours at the auto shop. He came home every evening, covered in grease, with stories of busted engines and stubborn bolts. Her mother, Denise, was a part-time nurse, part-time superhero, who juggled double shifts with bedtime stories. And Amara, only 9, lived in the middle of it all, like a quiet, curious spark. Then came the night that shattered everything. It started with silence. Then the distant wail of sirens cutting through the dark. Amara stirred in her sleep, clutching her stuffed bunny closer. In the living room, Marcus was sipping tea, watching highlights from an old football game. Denise had already dozed off beside him on the couch. What came next was chaos. Bang, bang, bang. A thunderous pounding on the door. Then a voice loud, sharp, terrifying. "Police! Open up! Search warrant!" Before Marcus could stand, the door was kicked open. Armed officers flooded the house, shouting over one another, lights blinding. Furniture scraped. A glass cup shattered. Denise screamed. Amara bolted upright in her room as the world tilted on its axis. "Down on the floor! Hands behind your head!" one officer barked. "What the hell is going on?" Marcus shouted, bewildered, raising his hands. Two officers tackled him to the ground. His head slammed against the floor. One knelt on his back, cuffing him with brutal efficiency. Denise tried to intervene. "Please, he didn't do anything." A detective held up a small plastic evidence bag with a wallet inside. "This was found near the victim. His name's on it." Amara ran into the room just in time to see her father being dragged outside. "Daddy!" she screamed. Marcus twisted to look at her. His face was bruised, confused. "It's okay, baby. Don't be scared. I didn't do anything. I swear." His voice was cut off by the slamming of the cruiser door. And just like that, he was gone. The victim was an older white man named Mr. Clarence Hill, who lived 2 houses down. He'd been found unconscious in his garage that evening with a head injury. When police showed up, they found Marcus's wallet under a nearby bush and his fingerprints on the side door. That was all they needed. They didn't ask questions. They didn't care that Marcus had an alibi home all night, watching TV, drinking tea. They didn't care that Clarence had had several disputes with other neighbors over property lines and noise complaints. They didn't even notice that the home's outdoor security camera had been smashed days earlier. They had a suspect, a poor black man. And that was enough. Within 24 hours, Marcus Daniels was officially charged with aggravated assault and attempted murder. The media devoured the story. Local mechanic arrested in violent attack on elderly man. They used his mugshot, the only photo they ever showed. They described him as uncooperative, aggressive, and a potential flight risk. They never mentioned he'd lived in that neighborhood for over 15 years, that he volunteered at the community center, that he read books to his daughter every night. It didn't take long for the neighborhood to turn cold. One day after the arrest, Amara stepped out onto the front porch and felt it. Not just the stares, but the absence of everything that once made her street feel like home. The neighbors who used to wave no longer looked her way. Mrs. Pollard, who always handed out cookies on Thursdays, suddenly shut her blinds the moment Amara's eyes met hers. The mailman, once cheerful and chatty, dropped letters into their box with robotic precision and hurried off without a word. The whispers were louder than sirens. "She's the daughter of the man who attacked Clarence. Don't let your kids near her. You never know what she's picked up from him." Every word spoken behind doors, whispered in driveways, landed like a slap across her small, innocent face. At school, the silence was worse. Amara had always been a quiet girl, but now she was invisible. Desks shifted subtly away from hers. Notes passed around the classroom excluded her name. In the cafeteria, empty seats spread around her like a quarantine zone. Lila, her best friend since kindergarten, wouldn't even make eye contact. "Why won't you talk to me?" Amara asked one afternoon, clutching her tray. Lila stared at her fries. "My mom said I'm not supposed to." Not supposed to. Like she was contagious. Like grief and injustice could be passed through conversation. Recess became a battlefield. Boys mimicked siren sounds when she walked by. One even barked, "Hey, did your dad bash his head in with a wrench too?" The teacher looked the other way. Amara stopped drawing. Her sketchbook stayed zipped in her bag, collecting dust. The girl who once turned every page into a world of color now only saw gray. At home, the walls were no longer warm. Her mother, Denise, barely slept. She worked 3 shifts now, nursing during the day, janitorial work at night, and folding laundry for cash in between. Her hands were raw, her back hunched, her eyes hollowed. Bills piled up on the counter like silent threats. The rent was late. The fridge made a low humming sound when it had nothing to cool. And through it all, Amara pretended not to notice. She kissed her mother's forehead when she could, left notes that read, "I love you" on the nightstand. She swallowed her sadness so her mother wouldn't have to carry it too. But when she was alone, the pain crawled back. Why didn't anyone care? Why was it so easy to erase her father with just a mugshot and a rumor? Why did the world look at her like she had done something wrong? The worst part wasn't the isolation. It was the realization that justice had eyes but chose not to see. That she, a child, had been marked guilty by association in a trial no one had the courage to question. The days after her father's arrest blurred into a fog of grief and silence. Amara stopped talking, not because she had nothing to say, but because no one seemed to listen. Her mother moved like a ghost through the house, working long shifts, eyes hollow, too exhausted to cry. Their front door, once constantly open for neighbors, friends, and laughter, now stayed shut. The only sounds that remained were the low hum of the refrigerator and the loud, aching absence of Marcus Daniels. But Amara, in her stillness, began to watch. She noticed things. How her mother's shoulders flinched every time the phone rang. How the TV always played on mute now, as if the news anchors would say something neither of them wanted to hear. How even the birds outside seemed quieter, as if the world itself had paused to see what would happen next. And then came that day, the one that would change everything. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sky was overcast, heavy with the kind of clouds that made everything feel slower. Amara sat cross-legged in the backyard, sketching absent-mindedly into her notebook. Her bunny lay beside her on the grass, faded and fraying at the ears. She wasn't drawing anything in particular, just shapes, shadows, feelings she couldn't put into words. The pages no longer held joyful stick figures and rainbows. Now they were filled with dark strokes, heavy lines, and empty eyes. Then she heard them. Voices. Low at first. Two men talking in hushed tones on the other side of the fence, just a few feet away, near the property line shared with the house behind them. Curious, she crawled closer, careful not to snap any twigs or rustle the leaves. She crouched behind a bush, heart pounding. "I'm telling you, something's not right with this one," first voice said, deep, frustrated. "The timeline's off. The prints, sure, they're there, but everything else feels thin." There was a pause, then a second voice, calmer, colder. "Doesn't matter. The DA says it's enough. He's got priors, right? Number clean record. Still, wallet's his. Fingerprints are on the door. Jury'll eat that up." Amara's fingers dug into the dirt. Her breath caught. She didn't recognize the men, probably officers assigned to the neighborhood during the investigation. But their words hit her like gunfire. The first one knew. He knew something was off. And the second? He didn't care. Because Marcus Daniels wasn't the kind of man people rushed to protect. He was black, poor, from the wrong part of town. A mechanic who spent his life with grease on his hands and kindness in his voice. And now he was being erased by a narrative too convenient to challenge. Amara wanted to scream, to leap over the fence and shout, "My dad didn't do it. You know he didn't." But she didn't. She couldn't. Amara burst through the front door, her lungs burning with urgency. Her sketchbook clutched tightly in her arms, dirt still clinging to her knees from where she'd crouched behind the bushes. Her mind raced, her heart hammering in her chest. She had heard them, those officers, admit it. The case was weak. They didn't care. They were going to bury her father with half a story and no justice. And she had heard the truth. "Mama!" she called out, her voice sharp, breathless. "Mama, I need to tell you something now." She found her mother in the kitchen, standing motionless over the sink. Denise Daniels wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking. She was just staring at the faucet, eyes glassy, hands buried in a pile of unwashed dishes. Her apron was stained, her shoulders slumped with a kind of exhaustion that went deeper than fatigue. "Mama, I was outside and I heard two cops talking. They said the evidence is weak. They said the prints were all they had, and that nobody would care. Mama, that's not fair. You have to do something." Denise slowly turned her head, her expression dazed, like she'd just been woken from a terrible dream she hadn't escaped from yet. "Not now, Amara," she whispered, her voice cracked like thin ice. "But Mama, it's important." Denise closed her eyes. just for a second. Then she pressed both hands against the counter and exhaled a long, trembling breath. "Please," she said softly. "Not right now, baby. I can't take one more thing today." The words didn't land like a whisper. They landed like a door slamming shut. Amara stood there frozen, her mouth half open, her hands still gripping her notebook like a weapon she didn't know how to use. Her shoulders began to shake, not with fear, but with something else. She had something real, something important, but no one wanted to hear it. The silence in the room roared louder than the sirens that had once torn through their home. Amara looked at her mother, her tired, broken mother, and realized something that crushed her more than the rejection itself. Her mom wasn't ignoring her. She was drowning, and there was no room left for Amara's voice, even if it carried the truth. So the little girl turned away. Quietly, she walked back to her room, closed the door without a sound, and sat on her bed. The sketchbook slid onto her lap. She stared at it for a long moment, her reflection faint in the window across from her. If no one would listen to her words, maybe they would listen to her proof. She opened to a blank page and began to write, slowly, carefully, every word she'd heard, every phrase, every detail, because somewhere, deep down, she understood. In a world that refused to hear her voice, she'd have to make it impossible to ignore. Every night, when the house fell into silence and the weight of her father's absence grew too loud to ignore, Amara would open her notebook and write. Not about her feelings, there was no room for those. What she recorded were facts, fragments, whispers, glimpses of truth that others overlooked or didn't care to see. She dated every entry, time-stamped each one with the precision of a detective. May 6th, 2:12 p.m. Overheard Mrs. Green say, "I thought Clive hated Clarence. That man was always yelling in his yard." Her diary wasn't a journal anymore. It was a case file. Each page carried the weight of what the world refused to acknowledge, that someone else might have hurt Mr. Hill, and her father might be innocent. She watched everything now, every glance, every whisper, every passing conversation. She'd walk slower past adults, speaking in hushed voices, linger in rooms just long enough to catch half-finished sentences. She learned how to pretend to be invisible, and in that invisibility, she became dangerous. One afternoon, Amara accompanied her mother to the cramped office of the public defender. Denise had to sign paperwork and speak briefly with the lawyer. Amara sat quietly in the corner, pretending to draw. "I need to use the bathroom," she said softly. The assistant pointed down the hall. But instead of turning into the restroom, Amara peeked through the slightly open door to the adjacent office. Inside was a conference table cluttered with files, legal pads, evidence logs. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She crept closer and scanned the pages. Then one name stopped her cold. Clive Porter. She recognized it instantly. She'd heard it before, one of the names mentioned in passing by the neighbors during the early days after the arrest. She couldn't recall the context until now, but something about it made her stomach clench. The file noted that Porter had once worked with Mr. Hill, that they'd had multiple disputes over money. One entry even listed, verbal altercation reported by neighbor, March 19th, Porter threatening Hill over what he's owed. Amara's breath caught. A memory jolted back into focus, something she hadn't thought important at the time. A week before the attack, she'd been playing in the yard when she saw a man standing near the side of Mr. Hill's house. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, half hidden behind a bush, watching, waiting. She didn't think much of it then, but now she was sure it had been Clive Porter, and he'd been near the security camera. The same camera police later said was broken, conveniently the only one that could have captured what really happened that night. She returned to the waiting room, hands trembling, face pale. Her mother didn't notice. She was too tired, too drained, and Amara didn't say a word, not yet. She needed to be sure. That night, she flipped to a fresh page in her notebook and wrote, Clive Porter seen near Mr. Hill's camera before the incident. Camera later reported damage. Dispute between Porter and Hill confirmed. Why wasn't this investigated? The question screamed at her in all caps, but no one else was asking it. Not the police, not the lawyer, not the press. And that silence, more than anything, told Amara just how broken the system truly was. It didn't care about truth. It cared about closure. And her father's arrest had been a tidy answer, delivered quickly, wrapped in fingerprints and assumptions. But Amara wasn't interested in tidy. She wanted justice, and now she had a lead. She didn't know what she would do with it yet, but she knew one thing for sure. Someone had broken that camera. Someone wanted the truth buried, and she would not let them succeed. Back in the courthouse, the air was thick with tension and murmurs. The prosecution had painted a damning picture, one of cold evidence and pointed fingers. No one in the room spoke of doubt. No one questioned the story handed to them, except for a 9-year-old girl clutching a worn notebook. Amara stood at the edge of the courtroom, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "I want to speak," she said, eyes fixed on the judge. "I need to testify." The room paused for a beat. Then came the scoffs, the smirks. One of the assistant prosecutors actually laughed under his breath. "A child?" the DA sneered, arms folded. "Your Honor, this is a courtroom, not a school play." Amara's fists clenched tighter around her notebook. "She's just a kid," someone muttered. "She's confused," another added. The judge leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Miss Daniels, do you understand what it means to testify in court?" "I do," Amara replied without blinking. "I understand more than anyone here wants to admit." Her mother, seated nearby, looked torn between fear and awe. The defense attorney hesitated, then spoke up, voice cautious. "Your Honor, perhaps we should at least hear what she has to say." The prosecutor slammed his hand on the table. "Objection. This is absurd. Children are notoriously unreliable. She has no credentials, no evidence, and no understanding of legal procedures." "She has eyes," the defense snapped. "She has ears." And she was there. Amara stepped closer to the bench. "I'm not asking to be believed just because I'm a kid," she said, her voice rising. "I'm asking to be heard because I saw something no one else wants to see." The courtroom buzzed with tension. The judge raised a hand to silence the murmurs. "Miss Daniels," he said carefully, "why do you believe your testimony matters?" Amara's grip on her notebook tightened. "Because my father didn't do what you think he did, and I know who might have." A heavy silence followed. The prosecutor rose again. "Your Honor, we can't allow this circus. The emotional manipulation here is outrageous. This child is traumatized. She's not credible." Amara's eyes burned. "So because I'm 9, I'm not allowed to care? Because I'm a child, I'm not allowed to remember?" Her voice cracked, not from fear, but from fury. "I have names. I have dates. I have what none of you bothered to look for." The judge stared at her, then at the attorneys, then back at her. "You may take the stand," he said quietly. The DA exploded. "You can't be serious." "Order!" the judge barked, slamming the gavel. "The court will hear what this young girl has to say." Amara nodded and turned the sketchbook toward the courtroom. The bailiff walked over and took it gently from her hands, carrying it to the judge, who adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the pages. Silence fell again. But this silence was different. It was the kind that comes right before a storm. The first page was a map not drawn like a child's scrawl, but with incredible precision. Amara had sketched the entire neighborhood from memory. The streets, the houses, the direction the sun had cast its shadows that day. Red arrows marked specific locations. One pointed to the exact place where the neighbor, Mr. Hill, had been attacked. Another arrow pointed to the nearby camera, clearly labeled as broken before incident. The next page showed a time-stamped scene. Clive Porter, standing partially behind a bush next to Mr. Hill's garage. His posture was tense, his eyes narrowed. The drawing captured his likeness with haunting clarity. The courtroom began to stir. Each page that followed contained moments Amara had witnessed, details no one had asked her about, because no one thought a child could see so much. There were sketches of the police combing the scene, of the wallet lying in the grass not near the garage, but a full 8 feet away, tucked under a hedge where someone could have thrown it. Another sketch showed the broken camera, wires exposed, a boot print in the dirt beneath it. But it was the 7th page that made the judge pause mid-turn. It was a face, a close-up, angular jaw, crooked nose, a small scar above the left eyebrow. Clive Porter, and beneath it, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. I saw him here the day before Mr. Hill was hurt. He was looking at the camera. He didn't belong there. The prosecutor jumped to his feet. Your Honor, this is outrageous. These are drawings, not evidence. This child is not qualified to present forensics, let alone... But the judge's face had gone pale. Sit down, he barked, slamming his gavel. Miss Daniels, these sketches, how did you make them so detailed? Amara's voice didn't waver. I remembered. I started drawing everything the day after my dad was taken, because no one else was paying attention. The judge looked to the defense attorney. Did any of this match the crime scene reports? The defense attorney rose slowly. Your Honor, yes. In fact, several of these details, including the wallet's actual location, were never released to the public. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Amara didn't move. She simply looked at the judge and said, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted someone to believe me. The judge flipped through the rest of the sketchbook. Each page another revelation, another blow to the narrative the prosecution had built. Finally, he set the book down and turned to the courtroom. This changes things. The prosecutor stood again, panic seeping through his carefully composed mask. With all due respect, these could have been fabricated, coached. Someone could have fed her this information. No one did, Amara said, interrupting him with a voice full of quiet steel. No one believed me enough to listen, let alone tell me what to say. He looked him dead in the eye. I was invisible to you. The judge took a breath. Court is recessed, effective immediately. I'm ordering a full investigation into the allegations and evidence presented by this witness, and I expect every page of that notebook to be reviewed by law enforcement and forensic analysts. The gavel came down hard. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Amara sat still, calm, but her eyes scanned the room like a hawk. She saw the DA muttering furiously into his phone. She saw Clive Porter seated in the gallery go pale, then flush red with rising heat. His eyes locked on her for one brief, terrifying moment, and she saw something flicker in them. Fear. She had cracked something open. Her mother rushed forward, kneeling beside her. Amara, baby, are you okay? I'm fine, she whispered. I did what I had to do. That night, the headlines shifted. Young girl's testimony stuns courtroom. Possible new suspect in assault case. Sketchbook evidence prompts emergency recess in Daniel's trial. And for the first time in weeks, Amara felt like her voice had landed, like the truth had punched through the concrete wall of silence that had surrounded her father's case from day one. But even as she left the courthouse holding her mother's hand, a chill followed her, because now people were watching, and some of them weren't happy, but she didn't care. She had exposed the cracks in the lie, and once a crack appears, the whole wall can fall. Moved by the precision of Amara's testimony and the uncanny accuracy of her sketches, investigators had no choice but to act, following the marks she'd drawn in red ink, straight to the gnarled roots of an old oak behind Mr. Hill's house. The dig began just after sunrise. Uniformed officers cordoned off the backyard of Mr. Hill's home, yellow tape flapping in the morning wind. The towering oak tree stood like a silent witness, its gnarled roots sprawling across the earth as if trying to protect what lay beneath. Amara watched from a distance, standing beside her mother and Detective Harris, her fingers gripping the edge of her sketchbook like a shield. This is where she marked it, Harris said, pointing at Amara's drawing, a precise rendering of the yard with a red X behind the oak. The officers began to dig. The air was tense, thick with anticipation. Every shovel full of dirt seemed to echo louder than it should have. Reporters gathered near the perimeter, their cameras pointed toward the action, their voices hushed in anticipation. Amara didn't blink. She had spent weeks being ignored, dismissed, laughed at. Now the world was finally paying attention not to her age, not to her tears, but to the facts she had fought so hard to be heard. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then a clang. The officer nearest the tree paused, eyes narrowing as his shovel struck something hard. He dropped to his knees, brushing dirt away with his gloved hands. A small metal box. The silence that followed was deafening. With extreme care, the officers pried it open. Inside, a black pistol, wrapped in a stained rag, a thick bundle of $100 bills bound with a rubber band, and beneath them, several sheets of paper wrinkled, damp, but legible. Harris stepped forward, donning gloves. He lifted the papers carefully and scanned the top sheet. His face tightened. A wire transfer receipt. Recipient, Clive Porter. Date, 3 days before the assault on Mr. Hill. Amount, $30,000. Another officer held up the pistol. Serial numbers intact, he said grimly. We'll run a match against the bullets pulled from Hill's wall. Bag everything, Harris ordered. Secure it all for forensic testing. And put eyes on Porter now. Amara stood frozen, breath caught in her throat. She had hoped, she had believed, but now she knew. They had found it. The weapon, the money, the connection. And it hadn't been found by any seasoned detective. It had been unearthed by the determination of a 9-year-old girl who refused to let the truth die in silence. She turned to her mother. Denise's eyes brimmed with tears, not just of relief, but of something deeper, vindication. All this time, she whispered. You were right. Detective Harris stepped toward them, face grim but respectful. Amara, I don't know how you knew to look here, but because of you, we may finally have the evidence we need to turn this case around. Amara didn't smile. Not yet. There's still a trial, she said. They still think my dad did it. Not for long, Harris replied. This changes everything. But even as hope sparked, Amara knew what they were up against. The prosecution wouldn't back down easily. Clive Porter wouldn't go quietly. And the system that had nearly crushed her father wouldn't just admit it was wrong overnight. Still, something had shifted. For the first time, the weight wasn't all on her tiny shoulders. The proof was no longer just in her notebook. It was in the earth, in the evidence, in the cold steel of a buried gun, and the trail of a money transfer. The truth had claws now, and it had finally surfaced. But Amara knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Sometimes justice has to be dug up by hand. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. The discovery under the oak tree had shifted the course of the trial. Amara had gone from the little girl to the girl who knew. And for a brief, flickering moment, it felt like truth might finally win. But truth, Amara would learn, often comes with a target on its back. It started with Clive Porter. Within hours of the police issuing a warrant for his arrest, he vanished. No goodbye, no trace, not even a call to his attorney. His house was abandoned, drawers yanked open, clothes missing, the back door swinging in the wind like an invitation to chaos. He ran, Detective Harris muttered bitterly as he stared at the empty hallway of Porter's home. Cowards always do. But Amara didn't feel victorious. She felt something darker creep in danger. If Clive had run, it wasn't just from justice, it was from exposure, from being seen. And people like him, she suspected, didn't stay gone for long. That night, Amara tried to sleep, but something kept pulling her from rest and itch in the back of her mind, a chill under her blanket that wouldn't go away. It was just after 2 a.m. when she heard it, a dull scrape, a whisper of movement, the sound of someone or something outside. She sat up, heart pounding. Her room was lit only by the faint blue glow of the nightlight shaped like a moon. She crept to her window, parted the curtain, and froze. Someone had been at their front yard. Her breath caught in her throat. On the garage door, sprayed in thick black paint, were 2 words that punched her in the chest harder than anything she'd heard in court. Liar, child. And beneath it, in red, lies. Vietnamese. Her grandmother's language. Her mother's language. It meant the same. Liar. Her knees buckled. She stumbled back, hands shaking, throat tight with panic. Mama, she cried, her voice hoarse. Mama! Denise rushed into the room, barefoot, robe barely tied, face pale. What's wrong? Then she saw it. The spray paint. The slur. The threat. Oh my God, she whispered, clutching Amara to her chest. Within minutes, the police were outside, flashlights sweeping the yard, radios crackling with half-spoken orders. But whoever had done it was long gone. No tire marks, no fingerprints, just malice and silence. It wasn't until later, when the chaos faded and the officers had taken their notes, that Amara noticed something worse. Her sketchbook was gone, not just misplaced, Gone. She tore through her room, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. The last place she'd seen it was her backpack. She opened it, breath hitching. The zipper had been undone. Her journal, the one with every sketch, every timestamp, every name, had vanished. "No," she whispered, voice cracking. "No, no, no." She dropped to her knees, searching again. Her fingers clawed through her drawers. She checked the trash can, the laundry basket, even the space between the mattress and the wall. Nothing. Her mother knelt beside her. "What is it, baby?" Amara looked up, eyes wide with panic. "It's gone. My book. My sketches. All of it." Denise's face went cold. "That book was everything," Amara said, her voice rising with desperation. "It had everything." The room tilted. The walls felt too close. "I kept it safe. I never let it out of my sight. Why would they take it?" Her voice broke, twisting into a sob. She hadn't cried in weeks. Not when the police came. Not when her dad was taken. Not when the courtroom laughed at her. But now she broke. Because even when you speak the truth, they'll find a way to steal your voice. "I told the truth," she whispered, clutching her knees, her face buried. "I did everything right, and they still want to shut me up. They still want to pretend I don't matter." Denise wrapped her arms around her. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so, so sorry." "But it's not fair," Amara shouted, lifting her head. "Why does it feel like telling the truth makes things worse?" Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Because sometimes the truth threatens people who've built their lives on lies." The words hit hard, too hard for a child, but Amara wasn't just a child anymore. Not after this. Detective Harris returned the next morning, jaw clenched, eyes weary. He looked at the door, the spray paint, then at Amara. "We'll increase patrols," he said. "Whoever did this, whoever took the notebook, they're scared. That means you're close to something." Amara didn't feel brave. She felt stripped, like someone had reached into her chest and stolen the last piece of her that mattered. "What if they burn it?" she asked quietly. "What if they destroy everything?" Harris met her gaze. "Then we start again, but this time, with more people watching, with more people listening." She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the kitchen table, pulled out a blank notebook from the drawer, and opened to the first page. She picked up a pencil and started again. Because if the world was determined to silence her, she'd make them listen louder, and louder, and louder, until the truth was too big to bury, too loud to erase, too powerful to steal. They had taken her book, but they hadn't taken her. The call came in just before midnight. Clive Porter had been found. He was holed up inside an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, a crumbling, graffiti-covered relic of the old industrial district. The place had no cameras, no neighbors, and no light except the flickering street lamp outside its rusted loading dock. It was exactly the kind of place someone went when they were desperate and dangerous. Police had surrounded the perimeter within minutes. SWAT teams moved in silence, weapons drawn, eyes trained on every shadow. Flashlights cut through the darkness like blades. The warehouse loomed like a sleeping beast. Detective Harris was already on site when the command radio crackled to life. "He's refusing to come out," an officer said, breathless. "Says he'll only talk to the girl." Harris froze. "What girl?" "Name's Amara," the officer answered. He asked for her specifically. The silence that followed was heavy. Harris clenched his jaw. "You've got to be kidding me." "He said if anyone else comes near, he'll disappear. Claims he has something she needs to hear and something the court doesn't want to see." Back at home, Amara sat in the kitchen, bathed in the pale light of the refrigerator door. She couldn't sleep, not after the break-in, not after losing her sketchbook. Every creak in the house made her flinch, so when Detective Harris knocked firm and urgent, her heart knew something had shifted. "We found him," he said, eyes grim. "He's asking for you." Amara blinked. "Me? I don't like it either," he added quickly, "but this may be our only shot at getting him to talk." Denise's voice rose instantly. "Absolutely not. She's a child. You don't negotiate with a criminal through a 9-year-old. "He won't budge," Harris said. "If we storm in, we risk losing whatever he's hiding." Amara looked down at her hands. They were trembling, but not from fear, from something sharper, Resolve. She remembered the words scrawled across her garage. Liar child. She remembered her stolen book. She remembered how everyone had tried to silence her. Now the man who had taken everything from her wanted her. Take me to him, she said quietly. Her mother's protest melted into a blur. Harris made a dozen calls. A secure plan was drafted. Amara would remain outside the building, wired, guarded by armed officers. Clive wouldn't see her, only hear her. A controlled setup, no contact, no risk. But deep down, they all knew Clive had already made contact. The moment he spoke her name, the game had changed. And now, in the middle of the night, a little girl would face the man who tried to bury the truth. Because somehow he believed she was the only one who'd listen. The air inside the tactical van was thick with silence. Amara sat on a folding chair, oversized headphones pressed over her ears, her hands resting on the edge of a metal table, trembling only slightly. She was surrounded by officers in Kevlar vests and tight jaws, their radios buzzing softly, their eyes fixed on the monitors showing live thermal scans of the warehouse. Across the street, in the rotting belly of that warehouse, Clive Porter waited. He hadn't asked for a lawyer. He hadn't made demands. He had only said one thing, over and over. I'll only talk to the girl. The microphone was live. Amara's voice was calm, though her chest thundered. I'm here, Mr. Porter. A crackle, a beat of silence. Then his voice came through, gravelly and low. Took guts to come. Thought maybe they'd shut you down. They tried, she replied steady. Didn't work. Another pause, then a hollow chuckle. Course it didn't. You've seen too much. Drawn too much. They didn't expect you. She didn't respond. She waited. I didn't mean for it to get this far, Clive said finally, his voice breaking like dry branches. Didn't mean for your dad to take the fall. But once it started, there was no stopping it. Her throat tightened. You let him go to jail. You let me get painted as a liar. And now you want me to listen to you? No, he said. I want you to hear me, because you're the only one who still might care what's true. Static surged through the line. Then his voice dropped to a whisper, almost too soft to catch. There's more. A lot more. Your father was never the target. He was just the easiest one to frame. Poor black man. No power. No voice. Amara's hands curled into fists. There was a deal, Clive confessed. Mr. Hill found out about the money, dirty money. They used the construction contracts to funnel cash. Fraud, bribes, payoffs. Hill threatened to go public. They needed him gone, and they needed someone to pin it on. I was told to plant the wallet. I wiped mine down. They said just the prince would be enough. The room went cold. The officers leaned closer to the speakers. Harris's eyes darkened. Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. Who's they, Clive? Clive hesitated. Then slowly, councilmen, police officers, developers, people with power and no conscience. Amara's voice was ice. And you helped them. I did, Clive rasped. And now I'm the one they're trying to bury next. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Why tell me? Because you're the only one who never stopped digging, he said. And because I wrote it all down. Every name, every payment, every lie. Amara leaned in. Where? There's a building on Sycamore and 8th. Apartment 3B, boarded up place. No one goes there. It's behind the old glass factory, the notebooks in the vent beneath the sink. Detective Harris was already giving silent hand signals. A team of officers peeled away from the van, heading toward their vehicles. Clive exhaled through the radio, the sound of a man collapsing under the weight of his sins. Do what I never could, he whispered. Finish it. Then click. The line went dead. Amara removed the headphones slowly. Her hands were damp with sweat, her heart still slamming against her ribs. Around her, the officers moved like a machine. No one spoke. There was no need. Her words had triggered something far bigger than even she could imagine. 30 minutes later, a tactical unit arrived at the rundown building. It was a ghost-cracked windows, graffiti-covered walls, dead silence inside. They breached the door to 3B. The apartment was stripped bare. Broken tiles, peeling paint, a rotting mattress in one corner. But under the sink, just as Clive had said, behind the rusted grate of an air vent, They found it, a black leather notebook. Harris flipped it open, his gloved fingers turning the brittle pages. Handwritten notes filled the margins. Names, dates, wire transfers, meeting locations, copies of documents, photos of ledgers, and on page 47A, detailed entry outlining the plan to frame Clarence Daniels. It mentioned Clive Porter by name. It mentioned a staged argument. It mentioned paying off a responding officer to overlook inconsistencies. It mentioned that the security camera near the scene had to be disabled permanently. And there, taped to the last page, was a printed bank transfer receipt for $80,000 wired to an account belonging to a city councilman. Harris closed the book slowly, every muscle in his jaw locked in place. Back in the van, Amara stared out the window, the warehouse now dim and quiet. She didn't know if Clive would come out. She didn't know if he would survive the night. But she did know one thing. She had the truth. In ink, in handwriting, in numbers. And this time they couldn't take it from her. No stolen sketchbook, no courtroom whisper campaign, no slur on her garage door could erase the proof tucked inside that notebook. For the first time since her father had been dragged away in cuffs, Amara felt something return to her chest, something fragile, but real. Hope. This wasn't over, but the tide had finally turned. And it started not with a badge, not with a gun, but with the voice of a little girl no one wanted to listen to. The courtroom was packed press, spectators, officers, and city officials all crammed shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on the front of the room. But the person the world watched most wasn't the judge or the prosecutor. It was a man in a plain gray suit, shackled at the wrists. Clarence Daniels, Amara's father. And this time, he wasn't on trial. He was about to be freed. The judge cleared his throat, tension hanging heavy over the room like a storm waiting to strike. In light of newly discovered evidence, including the notebook recovered from an abandoned property and the sworn testimony of Clive Porter, now in custody, this court finds that Mr. Clarence Daniels was wrongfully accused and unlawfully detained. A breath, a pause, and then, all charges are dismissed. Mr. Daniels, you are free to go. The gavel cracked like thunder. Denise sobbed openly, one hand pressed to her mouth, the other clutching Amara's. Amara didn't move. Her eyes were locked on her father, trying to memorize every detail, his tears, his trembling hands, the stunned disbelief spreading across his face like sunlight after a storm. Two bailiffs stepped forward and removed the handcuffs. The sound of metal unclasping echoed like a national anthem. Clarence Daniels blinked, rubbing his wrists as if unsure whether the freedom was real. Then slowly, he turned. Amara ran to him. "Daddy!" He caught her midair, holding her like he'd never let go again. "My baby," he whispered, voice breaking. "My brave girl." The crowd erupted not in celebration, but in chaos. Reporters screamed questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. Somewhere in the back, an angry official slammed his briefcase shut and stormed out. Because while Clarence was going free, others were about to go down. Clive Porter was led into custody the following morning. Face bruised, clothes torn from resisting arrest, he offered no clever lines this time. Just silence. He'd said what he needed to say, and now he would face the consequences, but he wouldn't face them alone. With the notebook in hand, investigators swept through City Hall like a wave. Within 48 hours, 3 councilmen had been suspended. 2 police captains were placed under federal investigation. A real estate developer linked to the fraudulent contracts was caught trying to flee the state with $200,000 in unmarked bills. Every name Amara had circled in her sketches, every single one, was now a lead in a widening conspiracy case. A case that had started with a child. Reporters camped outside the Daniels' small home, hoping to catch a glimpse of the family who had cracked the foundation of a corrupt city. But Amara didn't speak to them. Not yet. She was too busy making pancakes with her dad. The first morning home, Clarence stood in their tiny kitchen like a man relearning how to breathe. He burned the first batch, undercooked the second, and laughed harder than he had in months when the third finally turned out right. Amara ate every bite, even the slightly crispy ones. "I miss this," she whispered, tears falling into syrup. "I missed you," her dad said, pulling her close. "You saved me, Amara. You didn't give up. You made the world listen. She didn't feel like a hero, not yet, but the truth was out. And now so was he. The press conference was held on the steps of City Hall. Amara stood beside her father and Detective Harris. Microphones pointed toward her like 100 hungry eyes. But she didn't flinch. She stepped forward. "My name is Amara Daniels," she began. "I'm 9 years old, and I drew pictures because no one would listen when I spoke." Silence fell. Even the shutters on the cameras stopped clicking. "My dad was taken because people thought it was easier to blame someone than find the truth. They didn't care that the evidence didn't make sense. They didn't care that he was innocent. They just looked at him and decided." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "I was told I was too young to matter, that I didn't know what I was talking about, that I should be quiet. But I saw what happened, and I remembered, and I wrote it down, and I told someone, and someone finally listened." She looked up at her father. "And now he's home." The crowd erupted in applause. Even the jaded reporters wiped at their eyes. The mayor stepped forward to speak. He called Amara courageous and promised systemic reform and reevaluation of internal investigative policies. It all sounded good on paper, but Amara had learned not to trust easy words. Real change didn't come from microphones. It came from never giving up. That night, the Daniels family sat in their living room together for the first time in months. No lawyers, no police, no chains, just love. Denise leaned against Clarence's shoulder, eyes closed. Amara curled up beside them with her sketchbook, a new one. She wasn't drawing the past anymore. She was sketching the future. A courtroom, a tree, a little girl standing tall. A hand rested on her head. "You know," her father said, "when I was locked up, all I thought about was getting home. But you didn't wait for someone to save me. You became the storm." Amara smiled. She didn't feel like a storm. She just felt heard. And for the first time, that was enough. Justice hadn't come quickly. It hadn't come cleanly. But it had come. Because one voice, small, shaky, and determined, had been louder than a city of silence. And nothing would ever silence her again. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday. No name, no return address. Just a plain white envelope slipped through the front door mail slot, landing softly on the hardwood floor like a whisper. Amara found it first. She picked it up cautiously, turning it over in her hands. The handwriting was neat, almost too perfect, like it had been practiced. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. She opened it. One sentence stared back at her in bold black ink. "The truth isn't always what it seems." That was it. No signature, no symbol. Just that one cryptic message delivered in silence. Her heart thudded in her chest. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't praise. It was something else entirely, an echo, a riddle, a warning. She called her parents. Clarence held the paper with tight fingers. Denise stood behind him, eyes narrowed. "Is it from Clive?" Amara asked. "No," Clarence said. "He's in solitary, under surveillance. It can't be him." Denise's voice was low. "Then someone else knows. Someone watching." Amara's stomach turned. They had won. Her father was free. The conspirators were being investigated. The court had acknowledged their mistake. The city had praised her courage. And yet, this. Because some stories don't end when the gavel falls. Some stories linger. It had been 2 months since Clarence's release. In that time, the Daniels family had turned their pain into purpose. The sketchbook had been replaced not to revisit the horror, but to channel it. Not to draw suspects, but to draw solutions. And with the help of pro bono lawyers, investigators, and sympathetic community leaders, they launched something new. The Amara Truth Foundation. Its mission was simple but radical: to give families like theirs a voice, to challenge wrongful convictions, to train children, yes, children to trust what they see, feel, and remember, to believe that even the smallest details can spark revolutions. Amara became a symbol, not just of innocence, but of resilience. She spoke at schools, telling her story in her own words. She showed her drawings, the oak tree, the broken camera, the notebook that changed everything. She didn't pretend to be fearless. She didn't wear a cape. She just stood up. And because of that, others started standing too. But the letter haunted her. She kept it tucked between pages of her new sketchbook, folded neatly, like a scar that never healed. Every time she read it, her mind wandered. Was there someone they missed? Another name in the shadows? Was Clive truly the end? Or just the tip of something deeper? The thought frightened her, but it also fueled her. Because if there was more truth buried out there, someone had to keep digging, and no one knew how to dig like she did. One night, Amara sat at her desk long after the house had gone quiet. The wind tapped the window. Rain slipped down the glass like ink from a broken pen. She flipped to a blank page in her sketchbook. She didn't draw a tree this time, not a camera, not a courtroom. She drew herself, a small figure standing in the center of a vast black page. Shadows curled at the edges, stretching in every direction. But in her hands she held something small, a light, not a flashlight, not a torch, just a glowing orb, soft, warm, and real. It didn't drive away all the darkness. It didn't erase the fear, but it pushed back, and that was enough. 3 weeks later, a woman showed up at the foundation's door. Her voice shook as she spoke. Her son had been arrested 2 years ago. The evidence was thin. The case had holes, but no one listened until she saw Amara's story on the news. She wanted to believe again, wanted to hope, and Amara, she didn't hesitate. They took the case. They found inconsistencies, witnesses who changed their stories, security footage that had been dismissed. The legal team went to work. Amara drew diagrams to explain the layout of the crime scene. She interviewed family members with calm clarity, asking questions adults were too afraid to ask. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about making sure no one else sat in a cell like her father. It was about making the truth louder than the lies. The letter never had a sequel, no second envelope, no name, but it stayed with her. Every time the doubts crept in, she'd reach for it. The truth isn't always what it seems. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it never would be. But the truth, when found, could still shine. And now she was the one holding the light. A little girl who once stood alone in a courtroom, fists clenched around a sketchbook. Now standing at the helm of a movement, small, steady, unshakable. Because while some people build walls to keep the truth out, Amara had learned to build windows. And from those windows, the light would pour out into every dark corner. One drawing at a time, one story at a time, one truth at a time. And no letter, no silence could stop it. Not everyone listens to children. They smile, they nod, they pat them on the head. But truly listen? Not when the stakes are high, not when reputations are on the line, not when the truth is inconvenient. Amara Daniels knew that better than anyone. She had watched a courtroom turn its back on her. She had seen lawyers chuckle under their breath when she spoke. She had seen adults, supposed protectors of justice, roll their eyes at her drawings, dismiss her memories as childish imagination. But those drawings had exposed corruption. Those memories had cracked open a system of lies. And that childish voice had saved a man's life, her father's, and changed an entire city. But that moment didn't come easily. It came after nights of feeling invisible, after days of whispering the truth and watching it fall on deaf ears. It came after hearing her mother cry through walls and seeing her father sit in a cell for a crime he didn't commit. It came after being told again and again that she didn't matter because she was just a kid. But when no one else stood up, she did. And now her voice echoed in places it had once been silenced. Classrooms, courtrooms, council chambers. Even now, months after the trial, she could still feel the weight of that moment. Standing on the witness stand, her sketchbook trembling in her hands, her voice cracking but clear. My dad didn't do it, but I know who did. The silence that followed had been deafening. The disbelief, the protests, the judge pounding his gavel like thunder. But she had not flinched. Because when you've been unheard for long enough, Finally speaking your truth feels like roaring. The truth wasn't always safe. It wasn't always welcome, but it was powerful. And that power had come from a girl who refused to be quiet. A girl who, even in her smallest moments, knew that what she saw, what she remembered mattered. She had changed lives with a pencil and a sketch pad. She had cracked open the lies with a diary full of doodles no one thought to read. Because while others ignored the details, she was watching. While adults looked for proof in paperwork, she looked for it in human behavior and what people said when they thought no one was listening, and she had listened. That's what made all the difference. Not magic, not luck, just quiet, relentless attention to the truth. Now she stood on the stage of her former school auditorium, a small microphone clipped to her collar. The room filled with parents, teachers, city leaders, and students. Most were here out of curiosity, few out of guilt. But all were here because they had heard the story of a little girl who had refused to let injustice stand. Amara stood tall, her voice soft but unwavering. Not everyone listens to children. I know that. I've lived it. But sometimes, she paused, letting the silence settle. Sometimes a small voice is the only one telling the truth. Murmurs swept through the audience. Some bowed their heads. Others blinked back tears. But the truth doesn't get louder just because someone yells it, she continued. It gets louder when someone believes it. She held up her sketchbook. This was all I had, and they said it wasn't enough. But it was. Because the truth, no matter how small, doesn't go away. It waits. And if we don't listen, it finds another way to speak. Applause erupted, not the polite kind, but the kind that crashes through rooms, the kind that says, "We see you now." She stepped down from the stage and returned to her parents. Her father hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're braver than anyone I know." And she believed him now, because the world had seen what a small voice could do. The Amara Truth Foundation had taken root. Within the first year, it helped exonerate 2 wrongfully imprisoned individuals. By the second, it launched a youth advocacy program that trained students to recognize manipulation, coercion, and silence tactics used by authority figures. Amara was there for every step. She didn't lead from behind a desk. She led from the front, talking to kids like her, kids who felt invisible, kids who had seen things, heard things, remembered things they weren't supposed to. She told them their voices mattered, because they did. Not one of those children left a session with Amara doubting their worth, because she taught them what no adult ever taught her. Your truth has value, even if you're the only one speaking it, even if they laugh, even if they walk away, even if it takes everything you've got, you hold the light. One evening, Amara sat alone at her desk, the sky outside turning purple with dusk. She flipped open a fresh page in her sketchbook. She didn't draw a tree, or a courtroom, or a villain. She drew herself again, but this time she stood taller. The shadows still surrounded her, but they no longer touched her. And in her outstretched hand, she held a lantern. Inside it burned a flame, small but fierce. It cast no grand spotlight. It didn't drive all the darkness away, but it shone. And in that glow, others began to gather. Other children, other stories, other truths. Amara added their faces to the page. Then underneath she wrote, "They didn't listen. So I made them hear." Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is one voice, clear, steady, and unwilling to be ignored. If this story moved you, if Amara's courage lit even a small spark inside your heart, don't let it fade. Hit that like button to help her voice echo further. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another powerful story about truth, justice, and the voices society tries to silence. And most importantly, share this video. Someone out there needs to hear it, because sometimes the smallest voice can change everything. What part of Amara's journey hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments. Your voice matters too.